I want to give this some amount of sort of definitional background, because a lot of people, especially in India, when we talk about liberal arts education, people think of a list of subjects. Now, this is not actually the definition of a liberal arts education. If you go look abroad, pretty much every hi-fi school you've heard of is a liberal arts school, right? This includes the Harvards and the Stanfords and the MITs. And it's like, wait, these are technology schools. Why? No, this refers to a way of learning, right? That says that you cannot learn, a good physicist cannot be a great physicist unless he understands what a great poet is. And the same holds true vice versa, right? And I think that well-roundedness aspect is tremendously important. Why is it that India has so many great universities, but we have been, I know rankings aren't important, but we haven't been able to break into any top 100 rankings, right? And these same students and these same professors go outside wherever else, and suddenly they're incredible. So what is it that we're missing? And I think a core chunk of what we have been missing for a very long time has been this well-roundedness, has been this ability to look at a problem from different angles. I'm not going to belabor the usual sort of blind men and the elephant, you know, the poem, you know, people looking at the trunk and tail and so on and so forth. But I think there's a reason why cliches and stereotypes exist, because they hold a kernel of truth. And I really want to put that front and center as we move on to the panel discussion. So if I could ask all of my panelists to just say hi so we can confirm that we can hear everybody's voice, and then I'll get started. Monojit, if you could just say hi once.
Hi.
Thanks, Monojit. We can hear you. Manu.
Okay.
Hi.
And Anirban.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, excellent. We are all audible. This is excellent. Technology works. So I'll get started without any further ado. And I want to start with a question which I think is important that we take care of this very, very, very early on, because everybody and their brother is holding some kind of webinar right now. And I assume about half those webinars have the word blockchain in them. The other half have the word interdisciplinary in them. So interdisciplinarity is this huge buzzword right now. Everyone's like, okay, we can't make money the usual way. What do we do? Let's use this magic buzzword and it'll somehow solve all of these problems. So before we get into anything else, perhaps we could think through some real world examples that you know of or that you've been involved in where interdisciplinarity has been crucial, where being able to look at a problem from multiple angles has been crucial, because I think from that foundation of real world stuff, then we can start speculating and building opinions. So I'll come to Monojit first. If you could tell us a little bit about your experience in interdisciplinary projects.
Okay, first of all, thank you to the organizers and the buy-in for having me for this very interesting discussion. I think interdisciplinarity, I agree, it's a buzzword now, but the notion has always been there. But the way the notion of interdisciplinarity has evolved over the time is quite interesting to see. Like when I finished my PhD about 15 years ago, when we talked of interdisciplinarity, we thought of, okay, let me study two subjects. So I'm doing interdisciplinary research in computational physics. So I study computer science and physics. Well, that's, I would say, a very old notion of interdisciplinarity. What I see today happening, and let me give you a couple of very quick examples from my own work. So I work on natural language processing. So when we build language technology, of course, we need linguistics and we need computer science and deep learning and blah, blah, and all that. But that's just the bread and butter for us. But what makes a difference, right, between a good NLP and a great NLP person is your point, Debayan, of this all-roundedness. For instance, most of the time, where it gets stuck is to understand what the user really needs. So you need to know human-computer interaction issues. You need to know design. Then it comes to the point of, what are the policies around certain kind of technology. For instance, I want to deploy a chatbot for healthcare. Of course, healthcare also comes in, so I need to know about healthcare. But more importantly, what are the legal issues of deploying a chatbot for healthcare? Becomes extremely important because will it not cause some harm to somebody unknowingly, and so on and so forth, right? So starting from design to ethics and the policies of digitization to finance to marketing to all these aspects, we have to think. And I, being a researcher, what interesting thing is that we have to play all these roles in a typical development environment. Like, let's say if you were in Microsoft development, then there is a marketing team, there is a team which is just looking at how to evaluate, there is a team which is looking at deployment, and so on and so forth. But for us, we have to look at everything, and that requires a different kind of understanding of all these, plus this all-roundedness you said. So I think all-roundedness is something great to have, and disciplinary boundaries are just it's a matter of attitude. You see the boundary, it's there. You don't see, it's not there.
All right. Thank you. So before I move on to Manu, like any horrifyingly evil professor, I'm going to add another aspect to that question, because I'll still ask you to give me whatever examples that you can think of where it's been important, but we're in some sense talking about the end result, the outcome, right? So as professors, how do we, can you also maybe, just other than talking about the result, talk about some interdisciplinary coursework or anything that you've heard of at Ashoka or anywhere else, sort of that can help. What Monojit was talking about was the broad business aspect of any organization, the large scale problems, right? As he was talking, I was thinking about, how we are asking people to wash their hands regularly. And that's been one of the main pushes we've been making this year. But, 200, 300 million people in this country don't have running water. So what is the message we're putting out? Sorry, detour. But some mention of how interdisciplinarity works in classrooms and perhaps in Ashoka classrooms that you've been in. Some examples of that would also be welcome.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Debayan. And again, as Monojit said, thanks for inviting me. I hope this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So I'm going to build on what Monojit talked about in terms of interdisciplinarity. My sort of take, so my education up until my PhD was pretty linear. There was very little interdisciplinarity. I mean, all the research that I worked on was sort of became focused over time to one specific field of computer science or computer engineering rather. But over time, after mostly getting my PhD, what I've realized is the most interesting problems that you can think about. I mean, they sort of lie at the intersection of things, of subject boundaries as we know of today. Right. So we know of, computer science as a subject or as a discipline, but you take computer science and you think about how you can apply that to, let's say, biology or political science or economics or something of that sort. And if you sort of start thinking about, what are the very important, interesting real world problems that you can sort of figure out and find and then sort of solve with the kind of training that you have had over the course of a career, specifically in let's say computer science, right? So my particular take in terms of interdisciplinarity or making sure that we sort of focus on interdisciplinarity is because any problem, today's contemporary problem that is worthwhile solving, the most interesting one sit at the intersection of at least two disciplines as we know today, if not more. Right. So, and since you asked me to give you some examples of, how sort of interdisciplinary thinking is kind of encouraged at Ashoka is, so for example, one of the few courses that the CS department offers, one of them that is offered by a professor in political science and computer science, and it's called data-driven journalism, right? And then the idea is that how can you take CS techniques or very basic computational sort of thinking or even analytical thinking, it's not even computational thinking, and use contemporary computer science tools as they exist today and apply them to something which has been, non-computational, traditionally being thought of as non-computational as journalism, right? And I think that's a very interesting sort of take on things, is because there are so many numbers that are out there. Specifically, if you look at all kinds of public data that governments are putting out, just to make sense of that, to be able to do accurate reporting, journalists and anybody who's sort of making sense of these numbers have to have a very good sense of, what statistics means, and how can you take a bunch of data that might be unstructured to some extent and try to make sense of that, right? And as you had sort of pointed out before as well, that traditionally Indian universities have not been very good at taking disciplines and sort of putting them together. So in that sense, I think some of the things that we do offer at Ashoka in terms of interdisciplinarity kind of stick out. And again, there are a few more examples that I could potentially give, but this is one that just kind of stuck out.
Sure, cool. Thanks, Manu. So Anirban, I want to, it'll be the same question to you, but I want to pivot a bit, because one of the more common topics that comes up whenever someone talks about sort of subjects like computer science intertwining with everyone else is this whole concept of big data and analytics and gaining insight. And you're sort of a grandmaster in this area. So what I want to ask you is, sure, so computer science, rather, individuals with a CS background, with a pure CS background, I can see how they can get into these roles and then expand into using that lens to view other areas, right? What has been your experience in, suppose someone has a mathematics or econ background, right? If you're an economist or you're a mathematician, I can offhand, I feel as if, there's a lot of stuff they can use big data and the general term analytics to do. But if you could expound on that a little bit as well, because we don't just want to talk about people with pure CS background. So what are some of the areas in which this big data analytics stuff can be applied, not just in CS and not just by CS people?
Sure. Thanks, Devan, for inviting me in this. So is my voice audible? Okay, thank you. So one of the things which I would like to convey first is, when we think of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, the first thing we think about is, what are the skills I have? I'm a computer scientist, okay, so I'll try to push in computer science and try to solve in some application domain. But broadly speaking, I think it's a question of identifying a problem which you deeply identify yourself with. So the value is in problem solving. Now, to solve the problem, you can gather a team of computer scientists, economists, ethnographers, physicists, biologists, from many multiple disciplines. But at the first point should not be like a problem is already, should not be the feeling that we are a computer science department and we'll try to see where computer science can be pushed in anyhow. Because often that is one of the pitfalls of multidisciplinary work, where every department tries to see what they can convey or they can contribute rather to the equation. But first things first, we have to understand that we are solving a problem which we are solving. Is it a real problem? And who are your target market segments? So market segmentation, I'm not sure, it's not taught in any undergrad CS course, obviously. And that part is extremely important, because once you identify the correct market segment, then you know what are their pain points. And once you know their pain points, then those are the problems which you should try to solve. So that is one thing. The other thing about multidisciplinarity in general, as Monojit mentioned, and I completely agree, that it is not something new. It has been around for a while. It has been around for the last 40, 50 years. If you look at 1980s, there was plenty of NLP work done. If you look at these companies such as Manupatra, LexisNexis, and all that, they have complete NLP-based databases. They have done AI, ML, all of that. So it has been around for a long time. Even in smart cities, obviously, it has been around in finance also, retail also. But the whole point is, I think the training at Ashoka is basically not a siloed kind of training. Because to understand how to create impact in any business environment, you have to understand the first part, which is like any environment in business will function along 4 different lines. One is your production, another is your finance, another sales and marketing. And of course, the fourth one, initially it was called research and development, now it's called connect and develop. But basically it means, from our perspective, it's basically research. I mean, how you innovate and grow and create a value proposition. Now, looking at Ashoka's students, what I've noticed is they're basically well-rounded, because primarily, I guess, because of our foundational courses. They can think in multiple directions, and their focus is also on problem solving, which is a very good positive first step, I would say. But along with that, of course, the rigor can never be compromised. That part is a kind of given. I mean, we take it for granted. But one of the things which I would highly encourage students to do is to adopt the correct attitude towards computer science and towards jobs right from the beginning. Like, for example, if you join, a lot of computer science people are there at BMW, for example. A lot of them are there at in Zara, in Inditex, the fashion retail chain, right? So, I mean, once you get into a particular domain, it is not preferable to say, I'm from computer science, so I'll only do my computer science work, data science work. It is much better to actually start picking up some domain. So one of the questions I saw in that email was, I mean, how do our students progress further up? And one of the ways is doing that. I mean, trying to add an overall value proposition to the company, because ultimately the organization, company, university, I mean, limited liability corporation, whatever it may be, it is trying to solve a problem at the end of the day. And solving that problem will kind of add a lot of value. Now, regarding big data, I'll give a very few specific examples quickly, right? So, for example, let's take the field of finance. Like, a lot of these corporate frauds happen, majority of them are basically financial accounting frauds. So for that, you need to know both finance and big data analytics and data science in general. Now, the question is, if you are in that field, you will know clearly that, I mean, if there are too many shell corporations being formed by a company, it means trouble. That means they're doing some, I mean, creative accounting, let's call it that way. So, like, on the other hand, if you are not from that domain, then you will not know. Like, many times people are looking at, I mean, balance sheets, income statements separately, and they don't understand the line items completely. Often they mess up things like accounts receivable and, I mean, cash equivalents. All of the accounts receivable is what you're supposed to get. You might not get it really. I mean, it all depends. There are exponential decay formulas. So you have to understand the domain very well. For that, I mean, one has to build up the domain. Similarly, in smart cities, like before I started working on transportation, on the transportation aspect of smart cities, I had the impression, like most computer scientists, that we should make sure there is no traffic congestion. But then I started talking to people in transportation engineering. They said congestion is very good. I asked them, how can it be good? In computer science, we are focused on maximizing the flow. They said less congestion means less accidents. So, I mean, more congestion means less accidents, because so you get to pick up a lot of interesting insights when you talk to people from other domains. Similarly, we take for granted that the big data which is coming in from all sources, how clean is it? Those are the factors. But we need to also ensure veracity, and we need to find automated ways of ensuring that level of veracity, of handling that kind of variety, multimodal, like audio, video, images, text kind of big data. So without much further ado, I would just like to summarize in the following way. Like, there is some knowledge which is known to domain experts already. Like some guy who is working in retail or smart cities or finance for the last 20 years, they would. So the goal we have in big data analytics is something major, which is even that guy will have a reaction of, wow, I didn't know this was there. So you want to find things in an automated manner, something which somebody whose bread and butter it is would still be impressed by that. Because if it is normal findings, you might as well have hired somebody from the domain. And
because the problem won't come. The problem doesn't know how we've divided knowledge up epistemologically. And so the problem doesn't come with those assumptions.
But we are the ones who are siloing it up. So I would I would encourage a culture in which at Ashoka also, we don't think in terms of departments. We think in terms of we want to do something for air pollution. Currently, I'm working on the air pollution part in smart cities. We want to do something for augmented or virtual reality. And after that, we decide which are the departments. And I can tell you, in all these problems, these are so broad. Almost the entire Ashoka plus some other universities would also get it. Right. So, so we need to identify the correct problem would be my message.
Right. So let me maybe convert something from there, because we're still talking about sort of problem domains and what's good, right? Definitions of what we want. So maybe I could come back to you, Manu, with, whenever we talk about these kinds of changes, we've been doing this, now we should do that, right? Now, I know from trying to teach these foundation courses that Anirban mentioned, that it costs more, not just maybe in terms of cash, but an effort to train people up in that interdisciplinarity way. Like, if I'm spending, 2, 3, 4 classes building up that well-roundedness, then I'm losing 2, 3, 4 classes of pure CS content in some sense, and which is causing the degree to last longer, right? So there are some costs involved. And what we hope to get out of this is, in the long term, some ability to reskill, to pivot, etc., etc., etc. Even within computer science, this ability to, let's say, learn new languages quickly. That would be sort of the smallest encapsulation of this idea. So in your experience, how do you go about training people who have this ability? How do we, I'm sneakily asking you for advice here directly for my own classes. How do I train someone to not just sort of know Python, but to know how to program in some sense, right? Are there any core principles, or is this something that's really not generalizable?
That's a very good question. And I don't think I have a very straightforward answer, right? But let me try and sort of answer that in a roundabout way if I can. And I'll use your example about programming languages, for example, right? So I teach a course on programming language design and implementation. And the idea there is, and again, I'm thinking about from the perspective of people who want to use programming languages as tools to solve problems, right? So what I want sort of students to learn is that, okay, here is a computer. And again, I teach a bunch of courses in computer systems. So I teach architecture, I teach operating systems, I teach programming language design and implementation. And then the entire idea is this: if you understand how a contemporary machine works, right? From all the way down to the hardware, to the middleware layers, which is essentially your operating system, and all the way to the top, which is to some extent the user-facing part of a computer system, which is essentially a programming language, which you use to solve the problems that you want to solve, right? So if the idea is that you sort of understand the entire stack and how each one of these things kind of correlate and work together to give you the entire compute system, then you don't necessarily would care eventually one of the layers changes, right? So for example, if the programming language syntax changes from Python to something else that is, the most new and shiny stuff that comes along 5 years down the line, as long as you know that this is, a programming language is just a tool for you to be able to solve the problem that you want to solve, and how that kind of interacts with the rest of the system to be able to give you what you want to do in terms of how you want to solve that problem, right? So I think one of the core sort of principles, and at least I try to use that, is essentially to focus on the fundamentals, right? I mean, of course, we have to sort of relate to what is being used contemporarily, so that the students have a sense of, well, okay, I know this as, this abstract concept in programming language design or operating system design, but this is how it actually works in Linux, or let's say JavaScript, or Python, or something of that sort. So in that sense, if you have that connection in your head somehow, right? I mean, this is how it's implemented, but this is the concept that is actually being implemented for it to work. Then eventually, if one of those things changes, if the actual implementation changes somewhere 5 years down the line, you can still take that core CS concept, for example, and tie it up to whatever the newest programming language that you have to sort of use for either a new job or the kind of problems that you're trying to solve. And again, that I don't know if that sort of completely answers the question or tries to take the discussion in a completely different direction. But no, that has essentially
I asked the question because it was very difficult to answer. If I could have answered it myself, I wouldn't have bothered asking, right? So Monojit, any opinions on that? Because after this, I have a similarly difficult question for you.
Yeah, a quick point actually. So I often get asked this question whenever I go to colleges or interact with college students, that which languages should I learn to get a job at Microsoft? Or, even professors often ask from many colleges which languages should be included in the curriculum. And the standard answer is exactly what Manu said, right? We never expect a person to know a particular programming language. It's good enough to know any programming language of your choice, as long as you can solve the problems. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So here are my one question is for you, and then we'll try and sort of pull that out for others as well. So this question is sort of in two parts. Okay, one is that there's a huge diversity in roles, right? Other than just software developers, there's a lot of different types of people. And we as professors at Ashoka, I know I do, and I know all the other professors are better than I am, so they definitely do it. Is we make sure that they know what the difference is between a program manager, project manager, what kinds of different roles are there, what happens in real life in a research project. There's internships, there's a lot of stuff. But jobs are changing now, right? Like especially with the pandemic over the last year, a lot of these skill sets that are important have really changed. Right. And I think we were discussing briefly the other day that, I didn't say that out loud, but what I was thinking in my head is that, we had this old idea that artificial intelligence and robots will come into our lives. And, old cartoon style, they'll do all the jhadu pocha and they'll clean up our houses and everything will be nice and all of that stuff. Right. And now we see sort of two effects. Number one, anyone who knows anything about all the technologies, sort of enthusiasts are like, I'll have an IoT system, I'll walk into my house, the doors will open by themselves. And anyone who actually works with the technology is like, I live in a log cabin 50 miles away from everyone else and I don't have a computer anywhere near me, right? And given this pandemic and the way things are changing, we're seeing that, instead of robots being the underlings, right, humans are doing the menial jobs, and robots, in some sense, algorithms are doing what they've always been good at, which is organizing stuff. So, in Zomato or Uber, the delivery boys or the drivers or whoever, they are the ground level people doing all the work, and the managerial roles, which we really should have predicted. Who is the person in the organization that deals with a lot of data and optimization? And that's what computers are good at. And those are the roles, those assignment and optimization roles are the ones being replaced. So humans are really bad at predicting these kinds of things. So how do you see a change in the field of CS? Because people are predicting all sorts of things that, you'll have freelancers who move from job to job, right? Or you'll have some other kinds of change. What are the skill sets, programming, AI-wise, or just in terms of being able to move from job to job, that you see becoming important in the future?
Yeah, tough question indeed. I think I will build up on what Manu said. When, for instance, and in fact, it goes back to your initial point, which I so much connect to, Debayan. You said that the shelf life of knowledge is very short now. This is like, and it's becoming dangerously short. It's so hard to keep pace with how the field and everything is progressing. So the biggest, skill that I think anybody can possess at this point of time is very quickly, read from any point. It could be a paper, or it could be a person from which you learn the topic, or anybody else, or a video that you watch. But you get the information about something new and is able to apply that information in your work, in solving your problem, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. I think this is the biggest skill set. And that's what we try to test for when we recruit people. You had pointed that out, that what we test for, right? So because most of the time it will be like, okay, we'll give you a new scenario. We'll give you some, situations or some information. You could ask anything you want to know more about the scenario. And how could you use those information to solve that problem? So that seems like the biggest, kind of skill set that's required, along with the fundamentals, because the fundamentals always remain same, right? I mean, if you think of programming fundamentals, your conditionals or loop statements and all these are important to understand, not only because of coding, but because they are so important in solving problems in life. As we say, computational thinking. Of course, you may not be needing to write programs anymore. GPT-3 might write it for you. But nevertheless, you'll still need these fundamentals, because that's how to think about organizing stuff, or organizing a problem and structuring a problem. So I think that is one of the biggest skill set. The other thing, which goes back to the multidisciplinarity also a bit, is more and more we are most multinationals are, especially in CS area, is emphasizing in diversity and inclusion. Now, when we talk of diversity and inclusion, typically it means, okay, hire more people who are diverse, like diverse in terms of gender, diverse in terms of race, and so on. But if you think of the thing deeply, right, what diversity and inclusion means is that you should be able to, look at anybody's point of view, where they are coming from, and incorporate it into your worldview, or the problem you are solving, for your users. And this is becoming the overarching narrative for most of the things which big companies like Microsoft, for instance, are doing. And if you think of responsible AI, fairness, ethics, all these in some sense is linked to this issue of diversity and inclusion, because responsible AI means you are being inclusive, you are not being biased to certain kind of race or gender, caste, whatever. So understanding these things and incorporating these things in what you are, how you are thinking about a problem, designing a solution, is one of the other thing that we look for all the time, especially in the I would say last 5 years or so. This has become more and more important. I mean, there are many more things, but in the interest of time, let me just mention these two.
Right. So in the interest of time, we're almost done, but there is one question in the Q&A. I'll try and partially answer it, and then I'll pass it on to Anirban, because I think he's a particularly good fit for this. And I'll add a question of my own to it as well. So the question asks, isn't the interdisciplinarity more of a social aspect rather than a technological one? A software engineer can learn about a specific domain up to a certain extent. There is some limitation. Then the point is how and when we sort of team up with other experts. How do you build that skill, right? And one of the things on my end as well is the idea that how do I, when is something becoming more than a sum of its parts? Because I can't always rely on another expert, right? What is this? Is there something special in being this well-roundedness? I can imagine sort of like a protein with lots of receptors that attaches to lots of other shapes or something. Sorry, just thinking biology like everyone else is right now. But if you could give me a little bit of a background on your answer to this, that where does it change from being a sort of being well prepared oneself to good communication with others? Like what's within the boundary and what's outside the boundary of the cell in some sense? Sorry for all the bio.
No problem. So I think I'm glad you asked this question. Actually, it's a very interesting question. And if you think about it, like, I mean, it's about who you know and what you know. There are two of those things, right? So when you build up a team, it will also be about communicating smoothly with the team, taking the team along with you everywhere. I mean, keep updating people, and they will update you. It should be friendly. And these teams, I would say, typically build up not by combining two departments. They're built up by people in those departments. Somebody has to champion that cause. So just reverting back briefly to the previous question about the skill sets, I would say we were talking mostly about skill sets concerning technical stuff. like programming, Perl, Python, C++, whatever it may be. But the other skill is also, I would say, the skill to anticipate, adapt and learn. Because as you mentioned, Devan, earlier about learning how to learn. So we have to anticipate these are the changes coming up. Now, how do I adapt to that? And we should also be clear about the point that we should not expect things to be static. I mean, we should take dynamic stuff. I mean, things will change as the new norm, because things in computer science do change pretty fast. I mean, a technology is great today, tomorrow, you don't hear anything about it anymore, even in the news. So for that purpose, I would say, when it comes to interdisciplinary, one part is always reading articles on different disciplines. Like when I asked my students in computer science about how many of you read technology news, I was quite surprised, because most of the students don't read that. But if you're in tech, you need to read that. I mean, not just CS, but whatever is happening across multiple domains, at least what comes out in the tech news. So once you feel interested in the domain, the learning is bound to happen. Of course, you will not know building a building like an architect or a civil engineer, because that is their training, but at least you will have a broad worldview of it. That is what is necessary, because that will keep you engaged to the problem also. And at the end of it, I would like to say it's all about passion to solve a certain problem. So if the skill set is there, I mean, both soft skills as well as technical skills, but until and unless somebody has a passion and the correct attitude to solving a particular problem. Like I remember before I was working for Xerox Corporation, and one of the things which we were learning during some Six Sigma and all those kind of things is that respect people. Initially, I thought this should be kind of obvious, but then I realized it's about, I mean, this is not obvious. I mean, people don't often respect the work of people who are coming in from outside of that. Right? A CS major will think, oh, this guy is not from CS, so forget it. Or a design guy will think, oh, this computer scientist only know how to code. So it's not necessary. So the thing is, we should understand how each of them are parts of a jigsaw puzzle into those they are fitting, and each one of them is contributing to the problem. And the final point I would like to make is programming, as many great people have said, and I completely agree, of course, is a matter of thinking, right? If you go back thousands of years ago during Socrates and all those times, then, I mean, they used to study everything. They didn't distinguish between art and science and literature and all of that. Later on, we got a bit siloed. And if you see, currently we have completed we are trying to complete a full cycle by again saying multidisciplinary and trying to combine all these silos, which is going to take a while.
So, speaking of coming full circles, I'm going to have to end this because we're horribly over time. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. This has been a fun little discussion. I know there are some more questions on the Q&A. What I'll try to do is I'll try to send them to the other professors. In case we have an answer worth giving, we will. I'm not sure we do have a solid answer to some of these questions. But otherwise, that's it from this roundtable, this panel discussion for today. And I'll hand it back to Priyanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Devan Gupta, Dr. Manu Avasthi, Dr. Bolajit Chaudhary, and Dr. Anivar Mondol for that very, very interesting session. And in the interest of time, I'm going to keep my conclusion a little short, but thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Gupta, we'd request you to please stay on for the rest of the discussion. We may have some questions for you going forward as well. We'll move on to our next, the next session, which is on the future of IT and technology recruitment, and a discussion with HR leaders and business leaders that we've invited. How will talent acquisition needs change in the coming years? What are particular skills do organizations look out for in the workplace? Are there any skills that graduates need to develop in order to better prepare themselves for corporate careers? And for that, I would like to request Ekta Grover to take over for the next session with business leaders on future of recruitment in IT and technology. A quick introduction: Ekta is the founder of a B2B edtech company called Shunya that works on intelligent classroom learning management. Prior to this, she has worked across a range of roles across general management, artificial intelligence, and engineering in both matured companies and startups. She has a formal background in maths, economics, and computer science, and she will moderate a discussion with Ayskant Sarangi, Senior VP Leadership and Talent Management, Wipro, Vaishali Sabahit, Head of University Program and Talent Branding, Adobe India, Smriti Krishna Singh, Founder for Innovation Inc., and previously she was the CHRO at Flipkart and Sony Pictures in India, and Anuradha Arora, Head of Early Career Staffing, Google India. Over to you, Ekta, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Priyanka. I think you need to allow me to share my... Okay, cool. So first of all, thanks, Urmi, for having me. I'll maybe start from a little embarrassing note for everybody on the call. So Urmi and I, we met last year. So this was after a conference. We were just exchanging notes. And like any other normal person in a corporate setup, I remember having this conversation with Urmi that, look, we don't hire from liberal arts background. So that was, I would say, a foot in the mouth moment. I would say shortly within 2 months after that discussion, start my video. So shortly 2 months after that discussion, I ended up actually proactively reaching out to Urmi, and I think the best set of hires that we've had are from Ashoka, and I can't endorse that more. I think Urmi and I, we've stayed very closely in touch. So I'm very glad to be here. So what I'm going to do is, thanks Priyanka for that intro. I'll just maybe pick on, from where we were discussing in the previous panel. So I really started my career in a very non-linear fashion, more like, how Dr. Devan was mentioning about this elephant and the blind man. So I had this thing about exploring what these different parts of the elephant really are. And so started in quality engineering, then for a good 8 to 9 years, dabbled in roles across artificial intelligence, machine learning, across a range of applications, moved to general management. And last year, sort of started this company where I now lead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut up and I'm going to basically introduce the panel. I have a bunch of pretty interesting thoughts and questions. So we'll go over that. So I have Mr. Askyant, I hope I'm saying the name right, Askyant Sarangi, who's the Senior VP Leadership and Talent Management at Wipro. Previously, he was the Director, Organization and Talent Development at GE India. He's an alumnus of Xavier Institute of Management and NIT Surat. We also have Ms. Vaishali Sabahit, who's the Head University Program and Talent Branding at Adobe India. Previously, she was the Staffing Lead India at Google. She's the alumnus of ISB, and her and I, we share our other alma mater, which is Visvesvaraya Technology University, the VTU. Then we have Smriti Krishna Singh, who's the founder for Innovation Inc. Previously, she's been a CHRO at Flipkart and Sony Pictures. She's also been the VP HR at NBC Universal and Genpact. She's the alumnus of International Management Institute and Lady Shri Ram Honda College. And we have Ms. Anuradha Arora, who's Head Early Career Staffing at Google India. She's previously held positions like Lead Talent and Outreach Programs, Senior Recruiting Specialist at Google India. She's an alumnus of ICFI Business School, Hyderabad. So this is a pretty diverse panel because I see there are two range. So we have Smriti and Ayaskant, largely from the 1998s. So sort of like what we think of it like an old word, and we have Anuradha, myself, and Vaishali, sort of like the younger ones in the lot, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to start with Mr. Ayaskant. So first of all, am I saying your name right?
Ekta, hi, it's Ayashkant, but we are good. We're good.
Ayashkant, okay, Ayashkant. So Mr. Ayashkant, I'm going to start with you. So how do you feel that the mindset for hiring in liberal arts, has really changed qualitatively over the years? So in particular, any specific time or any specific, event or really, industry impulse functions that have really, driven that. So over to you.
Thanks, Ekta, and hi everyone, and it's a pleasure being amidst all of you. At least from our perspective, we have seen huge amount of conversations in this space as well as the needle moving, especially last 5 to 7 years, right? And there are certain drivers for that. Right? So what exactly has changed in the corporate world? Now, thanks to technology, the way work itself is changing, certain critical attributes are becoming more important than what they were even earlier. Right? Be it about my ability to learn and learn really quickly. Right? Be my ability to communicate, connect, demonstrate empathy. Right? Be it my ability to solve a problem and get into critical thinking, or be it about appreciating cultural nuances and leading global teams. Those are becoming factors for any individual to become successful beyond just the native knowledge about a specific subject person. And today, if you look at especially the IT industry, the number of courses on design thinking is probably far, far more than what ever was getting rolled out in multiple other companies. It was more about, hey, let me teach a specific language, or let me teach a specific skill. So with that expectation changing, obviously there's a need to kind of look at, hey, what's really happening in the market space? Where do we get this talent who would bring some of these capabilities relatively more natural to the table? Right? All these 4 or 5 capabilities. And that's when one kind of looks at alternate areas of recruiting, and therefore the whole aspect of looking at liberal arts as an area of focus. Right? Those, in my view, are the drivers for this shift. And that is something that we have experienced in the last 5 to 7 years from an Indian IT industry context perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would love to pick Ms. Riti's thoughts on this. On the same question. Any specific time, largely at across. So we've had a range of roles, right, across all these firms. So any specific roles, and how do you look at some of the same organizations that you started with, right? The latest one that you've been with was at Flipkart, which we consider more like a poster boy, as opposed to the traditional enterprises mindset. So if you can put a layer or a color to that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Ekta, and hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks, Urmi, for inviting me for this panel. I have a slightly different belief of, what constitutes good talent. And like you said, Ekta, Ayushkant and I, who, by the way, we know each other as well. So, when we started our careers and how we looked at talent, etc., I feel like the same qualities that stood good talent apart then, stands them apart even today, And so that's why, last year, someone asked me to write this, book on future of work. And as I started writing it, I called it the past, present, and future of work, right? Because I see those common threads throughout. So if you ask me, I think when we look at, good talent, I feel like the things that stood good talent out earlier were things like, mental agility and, and which is just how sharp you are, etc. Which I think, curiosity is a factor that kind of facilitates one's mental agility. I think is the same thing today. And what I see is that, there is no excuse right now for not being curious or not being able to get the right answers. And I'll give you an example. I was walking with my, mom and in the garden, and she knew all of the names of the flowers. And I asked her, I said, so how do you know, all these names? And she said, if we didn't know something, we went to the library and looked it up, right? Cut to my niece, who's 17, in New York. And, I asked her something, she asked Siri. It's so much more easier. She doesn't have to go to a library or anything. So I think curiosity is one factor, I would say. And for the generation that's getting into the workforce now, there really is no excuse not to, know the answers or be able to figure out where the answers are. So I think that's one. The second is, in my view, emotional energy, which you can call as, EQ, your relationship skills, and I see that naturally the generation that's coming in now, collaboration is so much more important. Instagram's contributed to it and all of that. I definitely think that that's, again, an area where, we continue to look for people who have great relationship skills. It hasn't really changed from the past, but I do think that the generations that are coming into the workforce now, they skew to it more naturally than maybe we did, right? Just one second. Yeah, the third one is just, I guess physical energy and just how it's about the spirit in your step and stuff. I don't think that has changed either. The big thing, that sort of needs to hold all of this together is expertise. And without expertise, all of these kind of fall on their face. So we continue to look for expertise, and I think the thing with expertise is that, when we go to colleges and when we used to go to higher, if you go to a technology college, you look for, technical skills or, how good the person is, et cetera, et cetera. But, and then there's this whole layer of, personality that you also look for. It's a bit of a, putting corporates a little bit too much on a pedestal to say that, they really know what, the future is going to look like in terms of talent that's coming in. What I mean by that is, I've always found that there is a push and pull between the generation that's coming in and what the corporate believes is right. And contrary to popular belief, corporates don't always know everything, and it takes a long time for that machinery to change. And what I mean by that is, we've seen that the generation that comes in, they're far more risk takers. I think the professor talked about it earlier, so I heard him say that flexi work is more important, learning and development is more important. And honestly, if you ask Ashkant and I, when we got into work, yeah, it was important, but definitely we were, I guess, flexi work and all of that was probably not on our top priority list, right? So I think what's going to happen, I feel, is, and it's already happening, it's been happening for a few years, because of the generation that is the Airbnb generation and so much exposed to the world, etc. They're going to change what corporates are looking at, and that's already happening. And once they start getting into senior management positions, the world will look, very different. So I'm not sure I answered your question fully, but that's just a little bit of perspective for me.
Actually, I went through a chain of thoughts. So there was this one conversation I remember with a senior leader, and the remark that he made was, my biggest fear for this generation, so we are talking about 4-year, 5-year into the company, that kind of generation, is that this is going to be the only experience that these people are actually having. So we were talking in the context of a company where the average retention rates are anywhere between 7 to 8 years. So if you've sort of spent that kind of a time in an org, your mental framework becomes that. So I have a question for Dr. Debay, and I'll pick some of what Ms. Smriti mentioned. So I think earlier also we talked about people and the departments, right? And I think what Smriti just said was the mental agility, the emotional energy. So are there ways in which organizations can sort of screen these out, if not groom, right? Because we can put a bunch of really interesting orthogonal skills out together. And I'm asking this because you mentioned this point, right, that it's not that you get the right kind of people, but then you have to toss them out of the org. So if you can sort of touch on, one, how do you effectively screen for these, and when you figure out that things are they're not like really how you would have liked these different kind of people or personalities to collaborate, how do you without enforcing or prescribing, how do you make that happen in a more conductive environment?
Okay. I'm going to say something that's probably going to make me persona non grata in HR circles. I don't think you can. I think the only way you know whether someone's going to be a good fit is by trying them. That's how I hire for a lot of positions that I work with. So if I'm hiring someone as an RA, I'll be like, I'll pay you, you come and work with my team for 2 months, right? And maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I haven't learned the right tricks and techniques to do a good interview, but I've tried a bunch of things, and that seems to be the only thing that works for, at least for me. I can only speak from my perspective, because I'm obviously far less experienced than all of you at this stuff, right? Maybe there's some trick I'm missing, but I've honestly tried everything, but somehow, no matter how clever I am, people come so well prepared for interviews. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes a person who's come to an interview, I do a whole day's worth and I'm like, God, this guy's an idiot. What do I do? How do I sort of say chale jao without sort of insulting them or whatever? And I work with them for a while and suddenly they blossom, right? And I don't know how to screen for that in any kind of short period of time. The only way I've found is sort of a semi-internship mode that I'm talking about. And that's sort of the only thing that I've found that lets me find these gems. I also maybe want to introduce the non-gem idea in this, that, you know, not everyone has to be sort of the perfect, mentally agile, brilliant worker, right? You know, there's a lot of balancing that needs to be done, saying, hey, you know, you're good enough for this, and this is what we need. We don't need an Einstein for every position, right? But we need people who can add value to the organization and add value to themselves. I assume this is something that all good corporations do as well, right? That's something I look at with my own labs. When I'm running a large research project or a lab, the number one thing I'm trying to do is, one, my lab should be able to do things that it couldn't do before you joined. And after you working with me for 1 year, you should be able to look back and say, I can now do things that I couldn't do a year ago. Because if I haven't done that, neither of us have added value to each other. So I look at it more from that perspective than anything else. And yeah, my real answer to the actual question would be hitting my head on a wall, basically. Like, trial and error is basically the only method I've found that works.
I'm going to give you a follow-up. So how do you do that with senior talent is the harder part, because those mistakes are even costly ones. You can't really...
I don't is the answer. I mean, I wish I could give you a better answer than what I did. I just don't have one. I mean, that's part of the reason why I agreed to be part of this panel, because I want to talk to people and figure out what I can do. Because exactly, you can do what I'm saying with starting out RAs and stuff. With senior talent, I guess you could go talk to the people whom they've worked with and stuff and things of that variety. But beyond that, I don't know if anything can be a true replacement for experiencing working with that person. Because I work with a lot of researchers, right? And believe you me, like there's no point working with a brilliant person who's like super khadus, right? You work with that person and it makes your own life hell. There's no point doing that, right? How do you find a good team fit that will increase the productivity of the rest of the team, right? Because there are people like that. I've worked with students, this third-year undergraduate who comes, works with me, and I feel inspired. I end up doing better work in less time, right? How do I find these people? Exactly as I said, trial and error. How you do that for a high-level person? I guess you would need to, I don't know, spy on people or like find their friends and question them. I don't know. References, I guess, is the only thing. Reliable references from people who worked under them, because I think that's also really important. You know the proverb, someone who is nice to you but rude to the waiter is not a nice person. So I try to talk to people who are students under. That's what I tell my students to do when they're applying for PhDs and stuff abroad. I say, don't bother talking to the professor. You can read the papers and figure that out, and you'll have one interview with him or her. Talk to the students. Talk to people who've left the group, and talk to other people, and then you'll find out the real story.
Yeah, that's really...
Can I react to that really quickly, if that's okay? I love what Dr. Debayan is saying, and it is so true. By the way, and Dr. Gupta, that's not just true for interdisciplinary roles. It's true for anything. And now it's my time to make a controversial statement. Nobody thinks they'll be able to gauge the real person in a 45-minute window. Neither the resume. Anu and I know this, we used to discuss before. A recruiter will look at a resume for 6 seconds on average. That is the amount of time you get to do this. And most companies are waking up to this, to be honest. And there's only one answer to this. And just my 2 cents. If the company wakes up at the time of hiring, if there is a position that's opened up in a senior, for a senior person in a team, and that's when I wake up and start to look for people, You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look for the easy ones. I'm going to look for those that exactly match the profile. I'm going to look for those that have these things on their resume. But if not, if I'm going to look for passive communities that we call today, passive talent, companies go out in measured ways. Internships also, like you said, is one way of passive talent. But even otherwise, companies are moving out, doing academies, sales academies, especially tech companies. This is our way of gauging that, because we know over 6 months, we are more likely to see how they react to decisions, how they react to situations, etc. So yeah, one very important takeaway for every person that's out there, and I think Anirban brought this up in your panel, is to know what you want to do. For us, it is a pull mechanism. But for you, if you want to be in those circles, I think also a little bit of push is definitely needed based on your passion.
Okay. So I'm gonna now direct the next one to Anuradha and Vaishali. So I know both of you share, over a decade of Google between two of you, but I'm gonna start with Anuradha first. And Vaishali later, because then she can put a color to the Adobe versus Google as well. So Anuradha, if you can, help me understand this whole phenomena around, this VUCA that we live in, and in particular, in your work across Google, what has really, accelerated the shift from a company perspective, and if in particular you can also mention use cases of projects that possibly would not have been possible if not for how you hire, groom, retain, build teams. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Ekta, and also thank you for having me here. Just for the context of like all the students who dialed in, I'll take a minute to just talk through what VUCA is. Thank you so much. You kind of shared some of this context earlier with us. So VUCA is a concept of talking about 4 very distinct socio contexts that you could probably be operating in. So it talks to volatility, it talks to uncertainty, it talks to ambiguity, and it talks to what's with the C I'm forgetting, complexity. So if I can be honest, and like at Google, like over the past 13 years, I went through that hiring process myself as a student, and then I've also seen the process evolve, and Shali can also talk to that in a bit. I think initially when we had started out, Google got some of these aspects right in terms of what skill sets that we kind of want to hire for, or we want to assess students or candidates in general around. And a lot of that, I think, organically were tuned towards looking for skills that equip you to manage, scenarios in VUCA more appropriately. So talking about, like how comfortable are you working with ambiguity? How comfortable are you understanding complexity across different business functions, or maybe like a couple of roles put together? How would you go about, managing some of these situations at your end? Also, with volatility, technology has just been so disruptive, and in a very good way again, right? Like it requires you to think very differently. So again, somebody was talking about this in the previous panel discussion around what programming language should I learn. So, right from the word go, we never spoke about you need to be fundamentally strong in X, Y, or Z technology, whether it is language or just, back end, front end, stuff like that. What we focused more on was the ability for you to embrace volatility, be very comfortable with ambiguity. And the way we looked at assessing it was through, areas like problem solving skills. We focused heavily on analytical abilities. We focused heavily on, looking at even general cognitive ability, but not necessarily to say that, you're good in X, Y, or Z fundamentals, but actually you're able to bring that theory into practice and break the problems into smaller problem statements and solve for it. And a lot of that required us to think very differently about how do we want to interview candidates and how much of that data signal is key for us to, make some informed decisions about hiring. Over a period of time, this evolved to even look at some of the softer skills. So we, for example, earlier worked with the assumption that if you are a strong coder and if you're really good with software engineering skills, you can be a great software engineer. So it does help you solve for technology, but if you don't have good problem solving skills or you're not a great team player, like how Dr. Devan was referring to, then how would you connect the dots between what your user is asking for and what you are developing in terms of a product? So over a period of time, we introduced a concept called Googliness in leadership. And these two attributes are again very key that don't get taught essentially in terms of theory, but in practice, I think that these are like life skills that you need at work. So again, how do you, like even like, for example, as an engineer, how do you not restrict yourself to just think about coding and development, but actually step aside to think about the product that I'm working on? Is that really helping us evolve or solve for more with the problem statement or the product itself? In the space of research, for example, if you'll see a lot of work that we've done with respect to flood forecasting or agriculture or even, healthcare, a lot of this needed, folks not just to be strong with computer science fundamentals, but also needed them to understand psychology, human behavior, a lot of analytics ahead of like just the technology that they were working on. So if you were to bring, these multidisciplinary and in fact multidimensional aspects into one place, what we needed really was a hiring process or an evaluation process that helped us assess these skills on top of like the basic fundamentals of great technical skills or great digital skills that are needed. So one part of it is that we try and do this through the assessment process, and that is where I think a lot of people internally within Google have been able to move around. For example, I'll quote Vaishali on this. She actually worked on the digital side of the house. She was working with business, and then over a period of time, she made her switch into people operations because there were so many transferable skills that she was able to bring to table. And again, you can always learn theory, but if you know how to problem solve, then theory becomes an enabler for you and not necessarily the thing that you need. And there are several other examples where we've had engineers come in from, let's say, chemical engineering background, because we didn't focus on are you really good at XYZ things. It was actually to look at were they able to problem solve, were they able to come up with ideas that are the next generation problems that we want to solve for. So looking for potential, looking for some of these examples is key, which is what we do internally as well. So there is a very strong culture of encouraging internal mobility within Google. And so we talk a lot about some of these skills very openly with Googlers, and Googlers are Google employees, by the way. So we talk, openly about some of these skills that are needed. And that is how we've seen folks from, analytics background move into research, or folks from core engineering background move actually into product management side of the house. And a lot of these moves internally have happened because of, I would say, strong Googliness in leadership that they exhibited on top of problem solving skills. So it's, you don't probably want to look at it in isolation in terms of what skill sets are needed. When we think of a matrix sort of an organization, which most of them are these days, these skills cut across multiple aspects, and that's really what we encourage, right from hiring. And then there are like it'll probably, I'll end up talking a lot, but what I'm trying to also add here is that with respect to retaining, with respect to growing, your employees, these are again the skills that we go back and work on more and more. So that's how the journeys internally also look very, very different, for employees, because we continue to create those simulated environments, and then the need of the hour with respect to product development is also such that it forces people to exercise or flex that muscle of problem solving or strong and analytical abilities, and getting very comfortable with ambiguity. I think in the beginning I saw like, it's an expectation now to, like the students or like anybody who's coming into the organization should know all the answers. I have a slightly different take on it. I think most organizations know only certain parts of problems that we need to solve for. In fact, we don't even know what we want to solve for 5 years from now. We are today talking about what Google or what India or what other organizations should be doing for India, right? So when the problem statement itself is unknown, then it's probably going to be an evolution to see how you identify these problem statements and then go figure out the solutions for it. So that'll be my 2 cents. Would love to hear from you, Vaishali, on it.
Of course, Ekta, should we Should I go with my slides for a bit, especially after?
So one of you give screen sharing rights to Vaishali.
I think I have it.
She can already. Yeah.
Can you confirm though if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Vaishali.
Fantastic. Thanks, Priyanka. Please excuse me, I have a background in learning and development and I have talent branding. So slides were the way to go. When Ekta told me we could do slides, I went with slides. So here's the thing, at Adobe, we are changing the world through digital experiences, right? Of course, it's a great company and has seen a lot of evolution, but I want to show you a little bit of what that evolution has meant through the years. And as most of you, I think, know, Adobe started with Document Cloud, with documents like Acrobat and PDF, and then moved to the cloud sometime in 2004, 2005. And currently we are in the platforms and intelligence business. And just to take a step back and talk about a little things that we've spoken about here, how have things changed? How have things changed for us from a talent standpoint? What kind of talent would a digital tech company like Adobe be interested in, right? In the beginning, core competencies, coding, people who can code and make PDF or umpteen products, can they do that? Do they have the skill sets? Do they have the necessary competencies? Was very important. Then to Anu's point, you don't know what problem you are going to solve. For us, that was the move to the cloud. That was the subscriptions and the recurring revenue. And those of you that know Adobe's history know that this was Shantanu's big move on creating a recurring revenue stream. But maybe what fewer of you know is that in the background, when this was announced, we announced this first to a few of our developers, to a few of creators, artists, because they are our big target markets. And we faced a lot of pushback from them. You can go on the internet and look for examples of this. You will see that there are petitions that said Adobe should not do this. Correct. Now think of somebody in that area, people who've been hired for coding, people who've been hired only for their skill sets. How would they manage something like this? Did we know such a problem will arise? The answer is no. Do you need to adapt and quickly make sure that you're launching something you know will be good for your business, you know will be good for the market, but your user isn't convinced yet? That is the level of transformation and change that today we are seeing just in the span of 5 to 10 years. Today, I know we are all pre-COVID, post-COVID, just like PCAD, we are pre-COVID, post-COVID. Some of you know that PPBU, our print and publishing business unit, is completely shipped out of India. After COVID hit, small, medium businesses, all of them started using online platforms, e-learning, etc. All of that business is shipped from India. How do you pivot to make sure that all of this is now available to your new clients, new customers, small and medium businesses? You'll see our hiring needs also moving. Towards the move to subscriptions and recurring revenue, cross-functional roles, program management, project management. How do you apply your coding skills in a real-time business became important. Now, today, we are thinking for critical thinkers. We're looking for critical thinkers, creators, big data analysts, decision makers, etc. And that's what you'll see here. We've moved from knowledge to application to decision making is what we look for in our process, right? One of our hiring managers, direct quote, I can teach somebody coding, I cannot teach them decision making. And that's the kind of aspects we are hearing from our own hiring managers today. The VUCA world, and just those of you that have not read The Fuzzy and the Techie, please do. It's an ex-Googler. I know might know Scott Hartley. He's written this book about the whole difference between liberal arts and techie and how the line is blurring between those. He talks about the Kuhneman framework, which is at any point in the day, you have an unordered universe and an ordered universe, and the situations you face will be any of these four: simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic. Simple, where do you think most of our coding goes? Most of our engineering goes, most of our programming languages goes. It goes in the simple aspect, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Our managers, even our project managers, program managers, for example, have to look at analyzing trends in a complicated area. They have to look at complex events, which means Is there context to what is happening? And then chaotic. If something like COVID happens, what do? You just have to jump into action and just patch that up there. So this is the kind of world we are in. Our hiring managers are waking up to this fact that you can't just hire for coding skills, etc. And this is how you'll see this happening. Hiring for potential, one of the things that we now do, at least at Adobe, is we hire for potential, which means as advisors to the business, we sit down and identify who your ideal candidate is and what is the next concentric circle of skills that you want to look at. It could be economics, it could be liberal arts, it could be environmental science. In fact, Scott Belsky, who is our director, who's our VP for digital media products, he has a degree in design and environmental sciences. He comes from that background, fantastic thinker, leads all of our digital media. Culture coda, to what Anu was saying, every company will have a certain culture to look for. For Adobe, that is creativity, leadership, and focus. Every interviewer now will need to interview for this coda and against this coda of that company. True for most digital tech companies, at least. And interviews also, to Dr. Gupta's point, now change. Gone are the days where you just ask somebody to code something in an interview. You look at it rather from what would you do in a situation like this? What would you do if this happened to you in a certain market or a certain business? I'll just pause here, see, Ekta, if I don't know if I have too much time, but we can move back to a couple of things later as when needed.
I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, I was saying we can use 5 more minutes if you want to complete that, and then we can go over the other questions.
Oh, so the fun part. In the past panel, I think we spoke about this. The idea is to future-proof your career. Your career, you need to know what your passion is and then look for companies that will help you reach there, roles that will help you reach there. Most of our screening, while we are now starting to screen in rather than screen out, which means instead of saying, let's say, a certain discipline cannot apply to this job, we are actually screening in, saying we want to look at economics graduates, we want to look at liberal arts graduates, etc. So that is good. However, it is still a pull mechanism, right? A company will look for talent for a certain role. If you are not in that mix at that point in time, the chances of you being considered is also lower. So you also have to think about where you want to be and be in those circles at the right time. Otherwise, there is no dearth of talent. India is a survivalist economy. For every role, there are dozens of applicants, if not hundreds. So think about that, be very specific about creating that role for you, understand the company and the role, understand their culture, showcase decision-making, and understand the ecosystem as well. Gone are also the times where it is just about engineering. Now you need to know, how does sales fit into this? How does marketing fit into this? Even when you're applying for engineering manager role, for example. So showcase that whenever you can, even in areas where the company is reaching out, maybe not for hiring, but for passive engagement, maybe an academy that they are hosting, or it is internship, any of those aspects we spoke about. Look to definitely showcase that. I'm just going to end with this. Twitter, YouTube, Sophia, anything that we are doing in COVID or climate change, everything started as a STEM issue or a STEM problem maybe, or a STEM need. But you look at each of these examples, at AI and its impact on humanities, or climate change and its impact on humanities, or how people are using Twitter and YouTube for propaganda, or maybe for things that were not planned before. It has now stopped being a STEM problem. It is now a human problem. This is where it is no longer STEM, it is STEM-H, which is STEM and then humanities, or STEM and human. And you'll be wondering why I have a zombie on there. Just to let you know, this is the Zombie Preparedness Manual on CDC. It's formally on the Center for Disease and Prevention. If in this day and age someone is telling us, you know what, if there will be a zombie apocalypse, you should be prepared, here's a manual, then think about what kind of world we are stepping into, and think about if it will just be coding or if it will just be computer science that will get us there. It will be applications of humanity. Think about that. I'll leave you with that, and please download the Zombie Preparedness Manual for sure.
Thanks, Vaishali. That was pretty interesting, a different take. So I have, I have the next one for Ayaskan. So in your career spanning both and Wipro, so actually two parts. So the first is, and largely when we think of leaner firms, where the decision making and reporting is sort of it's more fluid versus the traditional setup. So one, how have those organizations rewired themselves internally? And two, what kind of planning sort of goes back, right? Because if you have to like really take that big big elephant and make it move, how does that really happen? And so if you can put some color to that.
Sure, it's a great question, Ekta. Let me kind of give an example of what we're trying to do in Wipro right now. Right? So every year we go to 15 Ivy League schools globally, and we hire talent from those schools who are called Global Hundreds. We have more than 100 of them. And for a company of our size and scale, we have multiple generation of people working in the same company. So how do we really get those two ideas to marry with each other? So one real example that we have done, that's going on for the last 12 months now, is starting with our CEO and all his direct reports. Each of them have a Global 100 in the direct staff reporting into them. Okay? We'll sit through their meetings, question them, push back, interact with senior leadership, bring concepts to table, so on and so forth. Right? That kind of ensures that the leaders who are probably have more than 2 decades of experience, also trying to get in sync with what's in the mind of the talent of today. Right? So that's one extremely important initiative driving right now. Right? So in fact, our CEO has 2 of them, not even 1. So that's one way we're doing it. The second thing which we're trying to do is to, at least in our areas, let's say like policy making, we've identified certain areas which the approach of solving those problems is more bottoms up than top down. So again, for a company of our size, when we have close to 200,000 employees, it's very natural that the top 50, 60 people can get together in a huddle, decide some of the key policies, and that kind of becomes the way of life in the organization. And it's also possible that those 50, 60 of us could be far removed away from the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. So to overcome that, we have a set of policies which we have said would get designed by employees and will go bottom up for all the cascading of communication, because if it's good, if it gets cascaded by a senior leader, but the entire designing of that happens at more junior levels, right? Because that's where most of the current conversations are. And last but not the least, we started at least using a lot of technology in the last few years for having conversations with employees at large. So for example, when we would have, let's say, the appraisal cycle, for example, right? And I'm not talking about the process of the appraisal project, that's normal, right? That would run as, in terms of the design, the philosophy, why are we doing what we are doing? A lot of those conversations today are more around having chats with bunch of employees who can log in. We're talking about suddenly the CHRO and 5 or 6 of them talking to 15, 20,000 people in one go. So having dialogues, having conversations, accepting feedback, giving inputs, that's the way to go, because it's in today's world, information and knowledge is with everybody. Right? So we are using technology to break hierarchy. We are using structure to break hierarchy. I talked about the leader and the Global 100 working together, 2 in a box model. And we are using a process where it's more bottoms up than top down as a model to break this whole concept of hierarchy and get people to be working as much in a level playing field as possible. But it's not, I mean, again, what I'm telling you, it's not, there's no perfect answer to this. It's all trial and error. We have a share of challenges. We have had a set of mistakes as well. But this is something that we're doing consciously as an organization to break these barriers.
So Smriti, actually, to Ayaskan's point, when he was speaking, I was just remembering, how have some of these, again, traditional brands, how do they retain this vitality? So basically, and I was just looking through this, right? So you've been, for example, with Sony, and for companies that come with a very Asian, complacent, sort of very hierarchical mindset, right? Where even if you put the best and the sharpest, they're not going to open up in the room, right? So they're just going to hold up to themselves. Versus, the generation that is coming in, right? Like really, really very questioning. And I've seen in some of my own experiences that sometimes, when that culture is there, sometimes it also becomes just too much for any meaningful discussion to have. So both ways. One is in traditional setups, and two, when you actually over-index. So if you can touch on your experiences, maybe from Flipkart and from Sony, and a few of those other examples, that would really be good. So specific ones, if you can touch on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So, I think you captured it correctly. So Sony was a, very traditional company. It was, when I had joined, it was not even 100% Sony. It was, it had some Indian promoters. So it was a mixed kind of a bag, and going from there to, best employer status and, best on every list was a journey. A big part of that journey was rekindling the innovation that was Sony. And a lot of that came from how we, talked about culture, what we did about culture. And one of the things that I've very passionately driven both at Sony, also at Flipkart, is innovation. And I'll come to the Flipkart later. So we picked that up as an agenda, and not dissimilar to what Ayashkant was saying. We put a process around innovation. We invited ideas. We put, mid-level employees, mentor junior employees. Selection of ideas came from that route, etc. We had senior leaders sponsor some of these ideas and so forth. The other thing that was really interesting was, this batch of young management trainees, etc., that we had got. I had started a program there of reverse mentoring. And so these people came into, the management meeting, and they talked about, I'm talking about several years ago, they talked about AI, and we were a media and entertainment company. So they talked about, how AI-based movies, IBM Watson, all of that stuff, which was fascinating and intriguing to the senior leaders as well, right? And many of them asked for follow-ups. They wanted to know more, and so I think that exchange of ideas is very, very important, and it doesn't always happen naturally, because people tend to go into a comfort zone, and the longer you are in a company, the more senior you are. There's a lot of value to that, what you've brought, the maturity, seniority, experience, etc. But there's a huge, tremendous value to, young, new blood, new ideas, which are, not really so developed that they're so wedded to it, right? And sometimes, people say things which, end up being, massively innovative and intuitive things that somebody never thought about earlier. So I think for us at Sony, that really helped us a lot in apart from all the other things. One of our businesses was not doing well. You look at talent, it is very hard, of course, as people were talking earlier, to assess talent, and you do sometimes get it wrong. But I think some of us have we've gone through years and years of honing that skill, right? Knowing what to look for, how to look for it, etc. It's never 100% perfect, but you can get reasonably, good at it. And so, aside from, getting the right talent, all of that, you have to really build the culture out to make sure that, there's ample exchange, things are put together, and then we have the ability to break it apart very quickly, and I think in traditional organizations that tends to be a challenge unless you are building the culture that allows you to do that, right? Coming to Flipkart, like you said, poster child, and Interestingly and ironically, though, one of the big things that I did there also was looking at risk taking and how can we, be bigger risk takers. And companies used to come to Flipkart to learn risk taking, and here we were internally, and again, I think the principles are the same, right? I mean, Wipro is giant that's been there for forever. Flipkart is this young, scrappy, entrepreneurial company. So it might sound very weird, but we did the same thing. It's a lot of talking to employees, a lot of getting bottoms up information, a lot of sort of putting pods together of employees to solve problems, and then breaking them apart, right? So we in fact, we got the senior leaders together, and I delegated the HR work to them. So we had like 5 committees working on different things. One of them was innovation, which I was part of, and that led to what Flipkart is doing today, the incubation cell that the CTO and Naren, who's the strategy head, are leading now, which is looking at not just innovation within the company, they're looking at new startups, and how can Flipkart fund startups, how can Flipkart play a role. So the difference, I think, is in a company like Flipkart, right, there's a lot more naturally a lot more voice that comes from the ground, and people want to be heard. They have an opinion, almost to the level of being abrasive, right? And I think you asked a brilliant question, Ekta, is how do you balance that? You have to balance it, and it is very hard, because the other problem with that abrasion is the arrogance that tells you that I know this, and this is the right way to do it, and you need a mature way to handle that, and to say that got it, great idea, but you know what, I mean, here are some other perspectives that people with 20 years of experience or 10 years of experience, and that, which is why I think that constant dialogue, and it comes back to culture, right? If you're doing it with the right intent, you're not doing it for some political gain, and people see that if I give an idea, the leaders are going to not take it unkindly, and the leaders themselves are collaborating with each other, which is very, very, very important. That whole flow of ideas, etc., happens. So I can't stress it enough. I think if the culture is right, and if you focus on building culture from the beginning, in the middle, in the end, none of these actually remain as very big problems. They're all fairly solvable.
Nice. I think I love your articulation on the beginning, middle, and end, and it actually reminded me, so traditionally, right, the culture used to be like really this soft, non-quantifiable thing that was just supposed to be good to have, as opposed to now it's what really drives, the actual business results. And I think something that you said before, that it's going to cost you a lot of emotional and physical energy, because some of these conversations, they are the difficult ones, as opposed to really talking, plain logic, linguistics, programming. Those are easy ones, because when you're like really talking emotions, they're really hard. So I think I have we'll maybe just shift gears a little bit. So, if any of you, or, maybe we can direct this to Anuradha or Vaishali, if you want to take a stab at it. So any anecdotal career paths, and I think Anuradha mentioned that, Vaishali herself has done a lot of, these transitions for herself, as she kept disrupting. So how was that experience like? And for people sort of listening in, if they're starting either, their second careers, retransforming, or they're just graduating, what are the few set of things where, I think somebody mentioned about this, I think it was Vaishali, where you mentioned about these concentric circles. So how would somebody look at it? Obviously not like a 5-year lens, but, really in a very deliberate manner, that if I'm looking at planning my career, and if I'm looking at, I don't know how this job is going to evolve, like, how do you really plan for that? So any sense for people listening in?
I'll go with that. I'll take a first stab, and then Anu, if you want to add to that. My own career, you're right. It's been a little bit of a pivot, add operations to training and development, from there to digital sales and revenue management, and then to what we call HR, right? And I know Google has a 20% project where you can do 20% of what you want and what you like. But more importantly, more than that, each of these roles that came to me was because, to Dr. Gupta's point, I at some point expressed my desire to do something of that sort to people in my network. And for 20% of my time, I did that project. So sort of like in basketball, you have, it's called pivoting, where you have one leg very firmly planted and then you use the other leg to figure out where you want to go next. Sort of like that. And to Anu's point about internal mobility also, your zero moment of truth, of course, is going to be the first company that you work for. But within that company, learning, being curious, to Smriti's point about what else is there, what is it that, even if it is not related to what you're doing, but just that curiosity, because people internally are much more open to experimenting, much more open to seeing if you are up to it, and much more open to take a risk. So use that for sure. One other example is also Gloria Chen, who is our current CHRO. She started, she was before this the head of strategy for us. So she used to look at what should Adobe strategy every year be with students, professionals, all of our addressable market. And now she's heading HR. Right. So as and when we move up into our roles and up the levels, I think it expands naturally. But for us to have that ability, that curiosity is much needed. The ability to take risks is needed. Just saying yes to things that normally we wouldn't have said yes to. Most of my growth has come from what I call sweat in my armpits moments. It's very gross, but unless you're scared to do it, or unless you feel like you're taking a risk, it's probably not worth it. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
I'm going to ask you an uncomfortable question on those sweat in the armpit moments. Have you cried at work ever? You know, like when you're jumping into a new thing? Because I have. So I took this.
I'm with you.
I took this one role, at InMobi. So this was a horizontal in the CTO office, and for the first 3 months, you're working on very, very complex projects, right? So you're working on a 5-year plan, revenue operation, and you go back to the bathroom and you're thinking, what the hell was I thinking?
I know, and I've been there with you. And the truth of the matter is, you can't be cool at something until you've been embarrassed at it. If you've not been embarrassed at something, then you're not going to be cool at it. So you better get done with the embarrassment really quickly, is how I feel about it. Been there, done that, cried, yelled, absolutely, but everything is a stepping stone. So
actually, I had one last question, but I do see we have pretty interesting questions, and I'm going to start with the last one first, because I think it's a little sensitive, but it's also very, very important. So I'm gonna just address them. So do tech companies see value in hiring from lower socioeconomic communities? And would you go out on a limb to upskill such hires? So this question, I would say, really touches on the upskilling, not so much on the diverse things. But I think, because we have a lot of, folks from this, because traditionally, if you look at lower socioeconomic, background folks, they come with some disadvantages, right? So there's very little collaboration, very little critical thinking. It's very survivalish. So anybody, from this panel, probably if Mr. Dr. or any one of you, that would be great.
Sure, I'll give this a try. I think I'm going to be, the best thing I can do with such a sensitive question is be insensitive, I think. I have had kind of the opposite experience with people from quote unquote lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or even people from disadvantaged backgrounds in other ways, right? I'll be honest, I'm not sort of earning any virtue points by this, right? Because I wasn't like being very clever when I was hiring these people or anything of the sort. But it so happens that in my lab and among the people that I work with and who are funded via the research that I'm associated with, there are a lot of people who come from very disadvantaged backgrounds. There are some who come from very advantaged backgrounds, right? Among my students, there are people who own large swathes of lands and mining companies and so on. Similarly, there are people who come from marginal farmer communities, right? There are people that I know for a fact where the entire family, well, this person has since graduated, but the entire family lived in one house, 7 people, right? And the only reason I mention these details is because this person was comfortable in saying so to other people, right? I guess one becomes comfortable after one has come out of it. But here's what I found. Number one is there appears to be a bimodal distribution. There's sort of 2 kinds of people where it comes to this. There's one kind that burns out very quickly after sort of getting it, right? They'll have achieved something, and then it's like, I'm done. I'm happy, I've achieved it, and it's over. And there's another kind, it is not, I naively thought it was like these people have something to prove. No, it's not that, right? I've found people, and I'm still working with many of them today, who come from backgrounds where I couldn't imagine how I could even get started from that, but they have blossomed. And I think it is a love of blossoming. It is a love of knowing this is what I was yesterday and this is what I am today. I want to see what I'm going to be tomorrow. And I've worked with so many people who are like this, who I won't even say inspire me. I know that's the vogue term to use. I think they scare me a little bit. But I haven't, if anything, I've had advantages and only advantages from finding people in those communities. Because I'll tell you what, I think what's happening underneath is there's some self-selection. By the time someone gets to interview with me, by the time they're meeting me, these are already people who've like broken 10,000 barriers, right? Their systems, their ways, they've figured out how to work harder than anyone else in their community. They've figured out how to think larger than anyone else around them, right? I'm a professor in a family of people. Half my relatives are medical doctors, the other half are professors. Like, what's the big deal, right? But I think these are people who've already gotten used to thinking outside whatever boxes society and reality have put them in. And so once they come and meet me and I'm able to provide, I keep saying I'm an intellectual arsonist. I sort of light the fire of curiosity and run away. And they just do everything you need to. So I'll push back against that and say that it's very much the opposite.
Ekta, I want to come in also over here.
I'll just summarize what I heard from that. So I think what I heard, if I'm putting it correctly, is that it is as much your responsibility as much as is it possibly of that org to actually upskill you. Smriti, go on. Smriti, go on.
Yeah, so I echo the professor's sentiments that actually, because if you think about problem solving being a really critical skill for the future, right? People from slightly more disadvantaged compared to others, and I have always found that there is greater hunger in tier 2, tier 3 cities than like your tier A cities, right? Not to say that the one is better than the other. I think both of them you get talent all over, but it's also a function of the business and the fact that you have to make intelligent hiring decisions. And when I was at Sony, we changed our hiring strategy to say that we must go to tier 2 and tier 3. And why? Because some of our channels were telling stories to those people. And it was just, ridiculous that you had someone sitting in Mumbai trying to write a story for, a small town in Jabalpur. We changed our strategy to say that the kid from Mumbai will never ever be able to replicate years of growing up in a city like Jabalpur and being able to relate to that that cultural milieu that comes from the city, right? So that's one. I think as a business, you have to be smart. Who are you catering to? And it's the same thing that we talk about diversity and women, etc. If you're selling a product to women and you have like a dozen men designing the product, you're missing a beat there. The same thing at Flipkart, right? It's tier 2, tier 3.
Sorry to butt in here. It's a very interesting discussion, but we're a little short of time, so.
I'll shut up.
No, we would love to hear a little more, but we need to wrap this up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to wrap up, I think, at Flipkart also, we did a lot of work with, our delivery boys, delivery girls, going really into, and, it had a huge advantage because they knew every nook and corner and lane when, we were still trying to solve for pin codes and not all the pin codes being available. For example, Gurgaon has one pin code, probably it's changed now. But you hire locally, they knew their society and where to go. So I think it's stupid not to hire across backgrounds and particularly in India. And if I think that's just going to grow more and more.
I think we'll stop at this. And I think this was, I think as opposed to what we traditionally think of, culture, soft, HR-led panels, I think this was the best I've had. In fact, ever. Like this was really and I think the first one really set the tone. So I think I'll give it over to Priyanka, and we'll branch out into the alum experience sharing. Priyanka.
Yes, that's right, Ekta. I wish we could have continued and we had some more time, but unfortunately, we've run out of time therapy and we have the next session happening. But thank you for that, absolutely splendid session, all of you, Ayaskant, Vishali, Smriti, Anuradha. Ekta, we couldn't have asked for a better moderator. Thank you so much. All of you brought up some wonderful points, and we will, of course, have to move on to our next session with alums. But Ayaskant, as you said, changes and expectations in development in the market have driven a shift in recruitment towards liberal arts, graduates specifically. And organizations have become more open to absorbing graduates from non-typical pages, which is brilliant. And as Smriti mentioned, it is the mental agility, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, and curiosities that are qualities that were golden in the past and will continue to be in future. Thank you, Vishali and Debayan, for bringing up the importance of month-long engagements with candidates instead of just 45 minutes interviews. And Anuradha taking us through recruitment processes that pick up candidates who embrace volatility, be comfortable with ambiguity, and be excited about problem solving. So thank you all for joining us today. We will possibly have another session soon and have you all on board so that we're not tired of listening in and some very interesting points shared, and perhaps have another discussion soon. Thank you so much for your time, and it's an honor to have had you in this discussion. I'm going to move on to the next session for this roundtable discussion. And for that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Meghna, who's going to take over from here. Meghna, will you come in now?
Yes. Thank you, Priyanka. And in the interest of time, I will just introduce our moderator for the next session. Kshitij Kulshrestha graduated in chemical engineering from BITS Pilani in 2012. And then joined the Young India Fellowship in 2015. Post the YIF, he pursued an MBA at the National University of Singapore. Kshitij has worked across organizations like Oracle and NRB Bearings, and more recently Microsoft, where he's currently positioned as an envisioning specialist. Kshitij will be conversing with Simarpreet Kaur and Sanchit Bansal for this session. Thank you for joining us, Kshitij, and thank you for moderating this session. Over to you.
Thank you, Meghna. First of all, let me just check if I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible. Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here. And after such an interesting discussion from the panelists earlier, I hope we can live up to that. So with that, I'll just quickly introduce my fellow panelists. Let me introduce Simarpreet Kaur first. She's a product manager, artificial intelligence at Microsoft, and she graduated from the Young India Fellowship in 2013. And she did her BE in computer science from Visvesvaraya Technological University. And on the other hand, we have Sanchit Bansal. Is currently working in the corporate operations engineering team at Google, and he graduated from Ashoka Scholars Program in 2019 and majored in computer science as well. So welcome both.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Great. So I'm super excited to be here because I get to talk to fellow Ashokans after a very long time, in the sense on this formal setting. And I know we are short on time, so I would rightly, jump into some interesting questions, which I think would be relevant for all those listening. So let me start with Simarpreet. So Simapri, something which I'm very keen to know is how has your career trajectory been post YF? How has it changed the way your career has been, or for good or for bad? Very interesting. Very interested to know as to, because I know you from the one of the earlier batches, and that's when the whole concept of liberal arts education was not very not very well accepted, so to speak, and you went back into tech. So yeah, very keen to know how that went.
Yeah, so let me start, right? So after our YF, after Ashoka, I went to Microsoft, and I've been with Microsoft ever since. It's going to be 7+ years now. But then I have been changing continuously. Like I have worked on 4 different products now, right? And I think what's really interesting is that what are the core values that really drive you? And for me, it was basically the pursuit of knowledge. So all the products that I've chosen to work on are basically the ones that I wanted to learn more about, right? And not just that, it's also about the things that I'm really passionate about. And I'll just share a story in terms of how I went back into tech after YF. And I worked for 1 year. I was a product manager for a technical product. And then at that point of time, Microsoft was just setting up its CSR, corporate social responsibility. And the Companies Act was getting implemented for the first time in that year. And we had to build our own policy. And I was like, hey, I have done my ELM in this space, and now I really want to go and work on CSR and help draft that policy. So I went to my leadership and I told them that, hey, I know I'm a product manager, but I want to go and jump and do this. And at that point of time, I'll be very honest, I was told that, hey, you are in a tech company that judges people really a lot on, techiness per se. You're going to do something which is not going to be tech related, what's going to happen to your career. But I think the values and the confidence that I got from my education with Ashoka, that sort of propelled me to take this decision. And then I did it for like 1.5 years. And then I was like, okay, time to go back to tech, right? And thankfully, fortunately, I had a job within 15 minutes. Like I just wrote to 5 leaders whom I have been working with because of CSR and other marketing and communications related stuff, like the things that I worked on for that like 1.5 years. I was able to build my network. They had seen my work, and then they were happy to give me a chance. And I think after that, for me, it has only been figuring out the areas that I want to work on. What are the areas that are going to be relevant in the coming 10 to 15 years, and me making sure that I'm working on such products, right? So yeah, that's pretty much my journey has been in terms of trying to learn more and trying to stay relevant to what's going to come next.
Right. Thanks for sharing. And with that, I'll move to Sanchit as well. I know you have been in the workforce, joined the workforce much more recently than Simaprit and myself, maybe. So, want to know your perspective as well. And I believe you've done your undergrad from Ashoka as well. How has it been? How has the education at Ashoka helped you where you are today?
Yeah, I think thanks for the question. I feel like it's been quite a roller coaster. I would say starting at Ashoka in the undergrad was very difficult because it was a new program. No one really knew what was going to happen. We were sort of looking at where the YFs were going and taking that leap of faith. I'm glad I took it. It worked out pretty well. I did my bachelor's in Ashoka from computer science, and then I did so I took that one. So there's one more year at Ashoka which you can spend. So I chose to do that. I got a chance to work with some great professors, Professor Hungal from Stanford, Professor Debayan from MIT. And, we got to do a lot of research that sort of made me realize there's a lot more to the world than computer science and technology, right? There's a lot more spheres which are interdisciplinary. And that's when I decided that I'll do like a minor in psychology. So that really sort of changed the way I looked at how all these products or tools are being developed. And then after that, I went to Finland. I was in Finland for a small stint. I was doing some research there in the HCI field, the human computer interaction field. And and I don't know, like wherever the life takes me, it took me to Google. There was an offer in the residency program in the corporate engineering team. I took it up, and I think it's going to be close to 2 years being at Google, and I'm really happy. And I think I've realized one thing, that during Ashoka we would take very lightly, like the kind of exposure you get to people from different areas, to different kind of academics that you would not normally get in any other university setting, sort of helped me understand, and really helped me understand the gaps that I see around me. And actually internally as well, I was able to see some gaps in the operations of our teams, and I sort of ended up saying that, let me take this initiative, let me start this tool which could fill gaps. And right now it's being used globally internally at Google. It's one of the main things that I've done, and it's got a lot of good traction at Google. So I would say that, like, having that interdisciplinary approach and has really changed me in the past 5 years. Yeah.
That's very interesting, because and also I like to add, so I was the batch where the first undergrad batch was with us on campus, so I could see that transition from the first batch of undergrads, and you have the YFs as well. And I think that was a great kind of cross collaboration between generations as well. I would say generation because there was a significant generation gap, I feel. But I totally agree. I think it's I'd like to add to that as well. I think my career has not been a very straight line career. And I graduated in chemical engineering and started coding as a developer in Oracle. So my start itself was quite strange, but I always loved tech. Right. I always enjoyed the power that tech gave you, and I was always good with tech. So I think that's one of the reasons I got picked up. And then I kind of realized that I was getting stagnant in my learning. And I think that constant learning in one direction, for me, it was not helpful. And I think I wanted more perspective. I wanted more viewpoints. And that's when I came across the Young Ada Fellowship, and I was just blown away by the curriculum and the professors. And I think post YF, my immediate stunt at NRB was that they hired 6 of us to bring change in the company, and they wanted to transform from people oriented to process oriented. It's an Indian company, wanted to become like a multinational, and they needed these people who could get into the system and change things around. And I think that's where majority of the soft skills, so to speak, and the perspectives that I got, not in the classrooms only, but also in corridors, in parties, in just those conversations at night at the dhaba or anywhere, right? That's where I learned all of that. And I was able to appreciate much more. I think my learning expanded horizontally as well. I know learning something in depth is very important, but I think that a little bit of perspective at a horizontal level is also what helped me. And I think that helped me to land this job as well, where I was supposed to be at an intersection of business, tech, as well as storytelling. And I think to tell a story from a perspective of someone who's hearing the story is very important, to know your audience. Yeah. I think that's what helped me personally. So with that, I think this is a good segue into my next question. And I think Simapreet, you can take a stab at it, as to why I know you were in tech before, and then you came to YF, and then you went to tech before again. Yeah. But I'm just curious to know from both of you as to why did you choose to go into tech or IT, and how do you see that standing here at this vantage point?
Yeah. So that's actually an interesting question, right? Because when I came to YF, I was in the second batch, and so to speak, it wasn't even well established. It wasn't even that much of a brand at that point of time. But I was also driven by the fact I knew that I didn't know enough. And I was in Cisco at that point of time before starting with YF. And we were working on 4G at that point of time. And I'm talking about like 8-9 years from now. And I really did not connect with it. And I knew that this is not the world, right? And that's when I came to YF. And in YIF, I think, as you have mentioned, and Sanchit also mentioned the same thing in terms of your horizon really expands, and you get to see a problem for many different levels, and that really helps you, right? You really understand that each problem is not like just black and white; it's like multi-layered, right? So that perspective really added to me, but again, when YF ended, where to go? I think I was pretty certain that I need to go back to tech because again, I love building products. I love creating products. I wanted to be close to tech because I knew that tech is the thing that's going to be present in each and everything. Like for me, every business is going to be a tech business, right? And that's where we are currently. So for me, this was very clear that I want to be back in tech, but it wasn't what was not very clear was in what form, because I really didn't think that I was good at coding, but I knew that I was good with creating solutions, right? So I needed to find a role that could do justice to what I was good at, the skills that I could bring in, then also contribute towards that. So yeah, for me, I think why I've really added that sort of dimensionality to my knowledge, to my skills as well. And then I was able to bring it back to tech. So for me, there wasn't that sort of a lightning moment that yes, I need to go back to tech. It was always there. It's just that the experience helped me with me being much more aware about the world in which I am, in which the tech operates, and how it interacts with people. So that's the clarity I got back with after IF.
Interesting, very interesting perspective. Sanchit, I'd like to hear your view as well, because it'll be much different from, I think, both of ours, I think.
Yeah, I think for me it's more like when I've been like a tiny kid, I've been interested in tech. I think I was in that generation where computers and mobile phones were really more like accessible, and I was always baffled by how coding works and or how tech works, and that's where I sort of took my leap. I started doing a lot of these things on my own, getting my hands dirty with code. And I realized that this is something I like. But actually in the college there was an interesting moment. I realized there was a point where I didn't like to code. I actually enjoyed more of the system design or the brainstorming part of building a product. I was like, dude, I want to be like a product manager probably. I want to be in that field where you have a person zoomed out, like a bird's eye view of what's going on, but you can leverage the tech as you go along. And I realized that there's a lot of things you can do, but at first you need to actually be really technical when you're starting off your career. And I think since I'm in the early phase of my career, I took up tech. I realized that if I'm good at technical stuff when I'm starting my career, it helps me move up, and it helps me sort of really understand the whole problem. And that's sort of why I from research which I was doing in Finland, I sort of moved away and I joined this team here at Google, which was doing great things already. It was just that when you join like such great people, you also sort of rub off them, and you sort of learn a bit more. So I think that's what's happening right now, and I'm actually planning to move towards cloud. So I've learned a lot about how internal tools at Google work, and now I'm using that knowledge and I'm driving towards cloud, and I want to improve cloud in the next few years. So I'm planning to move that. That's still not sure, but like that's what's happening right now. Yeah.
That's super interesting, because I think that's a very similar approach that I had as well. And like after being a developer, going through those cycles of dev, testing, all of that, right? Doing the hardcore coding, I kind of realized the value of it. But I think it's also important to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. And I realized that I wanted to move towards the business side of things and drive be a business person who could code rather than being a coder who understood business, right? So I wanted to play on that side of the fence, and I got that clarity. I'm glad I got that clarity, because it helped me steer my move, right? And after YF, I was very clear that I wanted to get into the business side of things. I didn't want to get into coding, etc. But my role at NRB, where I was there, it was understanding business and then transforming the business through tech. And that was like, I found my gold mine. This is it. This is what I want to do. And during my 3 years there, after doing some amazing work with some great people, I knew that I wanted to be on the other side, where working with tech, but with various businesses to drive that transformation. And that's what got me to Singapore, because I was planning to do my MBA anyway, and but staying closer to Asia and home, and that's Singapore was something which I was familiar with, etc. So great insights from both of you all. And with that, I'll come to my next question. Something which is more relevant in the current time is post-pandemic, right? Like, Simranpreet, what skills, like, you do think will define this whole sector post the pandemic?
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think we've changed, or have we changed?
Yeah. So first of all, I think my view is a bit more long term. It's not just post pandemic. For me, it's like, what are the things that I'm seeing today? Like, what are the latest products that we are building, and what are the latest technologies that we are working with, and for which I see a scope. So there are two things, like two category of things that we can talk about. The one is basically your hard skills if you're really in the technical field, and then you can have your other skills as well, right? Soft skills or other hard skills. So for me, I think cloud, it's not like that it's starting anew. It's been there for like 10 years now, but it's going to be in there for a couple years more, right? Because everything is going to move to cloud from on-prem data centers that you have. The second is definitely AI. For me, the way it is that we have done enough in terms of AI research, and now we are going into a place where it's more about implementation, given the fact that you have a lot of structured data, you have a lot of horsepower in terms of computational speed, and then you also have strong algorithms like the AI research part that we spoke about, right? So that's going to power a lot more innovation in almost in every sphere of business, for that matter, right? Like, you be in any industry, you will have a solution that will be powered by AI. So I think it's good to be in touch with that. It's, if you are currently studying, and that's what I get from all the people who are in here, you would want to be assured that you know these areas. Blockchain is again another, I see a lot more implementation happening on it right now than before, right? And RPA autonomous devices is again something that I would say that these are the areas that you need to know as domains for you to be pretty much in touch with what's going to happen or what's going to come in the coming years, right? For me personally, I know all of these things at domain level, or have picked up like one area where I want to go deep from domain standpoint. But I think the other skills that are going to be really, really important are your, and I think people have spoken about it in terms of your complex problem solving and your critical thinking. And I'll just talk about these two in terms of how I define it. For me, complex problem solving, being that when you are a developer, and it happened with me when I was a developer, you just look at a problem as a technical problem, but that's not the case. Every technical problem is a business problem because it's trying to solve something related to the business, right? So that view is really important. So when we talk about comprehensive problem solving, when we talk about complex problem solving skills, for me, it's the ability for you to take a very comprehensive view of things, and also at the same point of time bring in that broad view. Because in the future, when we say complex problem solving, problems are not going to be in one particular area or domain, right? There is going to be that intersectionality of domains, and that's why the problems are going to be much more complex to solve. So that is definitely one skill that we need to have, irrespective of whether you want to be a programmer or a product manager or something else. The second thing is critical thinking. And the way I define for myself is people say think outside the box most of the time, but what that really means. So for me, that really means is questioning the contours or the boundaries of the box, right? Questioning or calling out the unstated assumptions or unstated limitations that have been put. And if you can just remove them and think, for me, that is what critical thinking means, because then you will be able to bring out original ideas that others haven't thought of. I think third thing which Sanchit pointed out, and which I did not have, and I learned it at YIF, it was more about initiation, being in charge, driving people along. that's going to be really, really important in the future, right? And this can be learned, and I learned it at YF. So for me, other than the core technical skills, these are the skills that I would personally say that we should focus on, and I'm also learning. So yeah.
Right. I know we are short on time. I'd just like to add to that just quickly is I think mixed reality is something which I would also say is the next big thing. And in terms of soft skills, I think to keep things, learn to make things simple. I think tech has come to the foreground now. It's not an IT support anymore. It's actually leading a lot of industries. So I think a lot of people are engaging with tech. So I think a lot of people don't understand tech. So I think one of the other things is to be able to articulate things in a much simpler manner is the way ahead as well. And Sanchit, if you would quickly like to add something before we close off and pass it on back to the team, please add.
Sure. So I just two things. I think from what Simapreet said, I think one is process improvement in general. Like that's the sort of broad term to say just we're looking for process improvement. We want to optimize how things have been working, and blockchain, quantum computing, everything is part of that. And I think the second part is very simple: the human connection to working in a workspace, to working pre-pandemic is, I think that's something that's missing. And I think people are also trying to sort of make online games, Among Us, small things that are, bringing people together. It's with tech that's it's happening, but it's, the reason why it's happening is that human connection needs to come back. So I think I'm looking forward to how that happens post-pandemic as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time, and thank you for your giving us your time and your thoughts. And with that, I'll just pass it back to Priyanka.
Thank you very much. We feel very, very proud of our alums who have done remarkably well in their careers and like after Ashoka University. Thank you, Kshitij. Thank you, Simarpreet. Thank you, Sanjit, for sharing your experiences with us. And I'd like to wrap it up now. Unfortunately, we have to pass over this link to another team that's hosting an event. But thank you all for joining in today. And we're delighted that you all participated in this event. And of course, we will make the recordings of this session available to anybody who's interested in listening in. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you, everybody.
All the best. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Cheers.